The lobby of the Carradine Grand had never felt smaller than it did that Tuesday morning, when a scream cut through the marble stillness like a blade through silk. A passport burgundy leather, gold embossed, belonging to a minister's aide had vanished from a suite that cost more per night than Freya Larkins earned in 3 months. Within minutes, the machinery of blame began to turn, faster than truth could travel, and a form appeared on a supervisor's desk with her name already typed in the blank space marked responsible party. Gareth Holloway watched it all from behind the bellman's desk, his tired eyes tracking not the chaos, but the patterns that edited timestamps, the hushed phone calls, the way power always found a ladder to climb down. He had come to this hotel for reasons he never spoke aloud, wearing a uniform that fit too well and a smile that calculated angles. In the service elevator that afternoon, he would press a folded note into Freya's palm, a promise written in silence, even as the ground prepared to open beneath her feet. Some humiliations are performed for an audience. Some identities are buried so deep they require an excavation to unearth. This is the story of how a lost document became a war, and how the help stopped being invisible. The scream came from the East Wing, near the private elevator that required a keycard costing $5,000 annually to operate. Freya was pushing her cart of linens past the alcove when she saw the woman-tailored cream suit, pearls that caught the light like accusations clutching an empty leather folio. They took it, the woman shrieked, not at Freya, but through her, as if the housekeeper were merely another fixture to absorb wealthy distress. Within 7 minutes, 3 men in suits arrived, their shoes clicking a rhythm of urgency that the staff had learned to fear. Freya stepped back into the service corridor, her uniform suddenly feeling like a target, her name tag a liability she could not remove. The hotel's crisis protocol activated with mechanical precision, but she noticed it moved faster than when a maid had reported theft last month. What she could not know, as she resumed her route to the linen room, was that a form bearing her employee ID had already begun its journey through the administrative bloodstream. The document appeared on housekeeping supervisor Darnell's desk at 9:47 a.m., 17 minutes after the scream. It was a security incident report, standard Carradine Grand template, but the handwriting in the narrative section matched no one on the current shift. Freya's name sat in the employee-involved field, her hire date and locker number appended with suspicious completeness. Darnell, who had once borrowed money from Freya's sister for rent, stared at the paper as if it might bite him. He thought of the mortgage, of his daughter's tuition, of the way Magnus Carradine's voice could make careers vanish over breakfast. The form claimed Freya had accessed the VIP floor at 6:15 a.m., a time she was clocked in but assigned to the West Wing entirely. He should have questioned it. He should have checked the digital logs. He should have remembered that Freya brought him coffee when his wife left. Instead, he initialed the bottom corner, wondering if compliance was the same as cowardice, or if the distinction mattered when the rent was due. Magnus Carradine arrived through the staff entrance, a deliberate choice that allowed him to survey the hierarchy before they could compose their faces. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Freya's annual salary, and he moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never been asked to wait. "My friends," he said, gathering the department heads in the windowless conference room beneath the kitchens, "we have a situation that requires surgical precision." His smile was warm, his eyes were cold, and his hands gestured with the grace of a conductor preparing an orchestra for tragedy. The minister's aid cannot be delayed. The consortium's reputation cannot be tarnished. And we, he paused, letting the silence stretch, cannot afford the luxury of an unsolved mystery. He spoke of solutions, of protecting the hotel's interests, of how fortunate they were to have a clear administrative trail to follow. When he mentioned Freya's name, he did so with theatrical reluctance, as if the evidence had forced his hand, leaving no room for doubt or delay. Gareth heard the meeting's conclusion before it ended, his position at the bellman's desk providing an acoustic funnel from the service corridor. He had spent 3 months learning the hotel's rhythms, the way sound traveled through ventilation shafts, the exact cadence of Magnus' footsteps. Now he watched the concierge station, where a young man named Julian was pulling up the morning's digital logs with shaking hands. The timestamp on the VIP floor access record read 6:15 a.m., but Gareth had been delivering newspapers to the East Wing at that exact moment. He had seen Julian at the desk, alone, drinking coffee that Gareth himself had fetched from the staff kitchen. The log showed Julian's authorization code, but the name field had been altered. Gareth could see the pixel compression difference in the screenshot. He said nothing. He filed the observation in the mental cabinet he maintained with obsessive precision, the one labeled with case numbers he never spoke aloud. His silence was not complicity, it was cultivation, a gardener watching weeds grow so he might later demonstrate exactly how they had been planted. Freya found the envelope in her locker at 2:15 p.m., tucked between her street shoes and the sweater she wore home. Inside was $5,000 in cash, crisp hundreds that smelled of the bank's counting machine, and a note written in elegant script. For your discretion regarding today's events. Your sister's school tuition is due next month. Consider this a retention bonus. She sat on the bench in the windowless locker room, the fluorescent light buzzing above her like an angry insect. The money would cover the semester. The money would keep the landlord patient. The money would buy her silence in a language she had never learned to speak. But the note's knowledge of her sister's tuition felt like a hand around her throat, a demonstration that they had already entered her life beyond the hotel's walls. She thought of Gareth, of the way he had looked at her last week when their hands touched exchanging a room key, as if he saw something worth protecting. If she took the money, she became the lie they needed. If she refused, she became the sacrifice they required. The envelope sat in her palm like a heartbeat, pulsing with the rhythm of a choice that would define everything that followed. They met in the service elevator at 3:30 a.m., the hour when the hotel's breathing grew shallow and honest. Gareth had pressed the button for the basement, but he held the door when he saw her, his tired eyes finding hers in the stainless steel reflection. I know about the form, he said, not asking, his voice carrying the precision of someone who chose words like weapons. Freya clutched the envelope, still unspent, still burning in her pocket like a coal she could not drop or hold. They know about my sister, she whispered, and the confession felt like stripping skin, revealing the vulnerability that kept her compliant. Gareth reached into his own pocket and produced a folded note, pressing it into her palm with the gentleness of a promise. Don't sign anything. Don't accept anything. Don't trust the timestamps. His instructions were specific, legalistic, carrying a weight that belied his uniform. The elevator dinged its arrival, but neither moved, suspended in the metal box that smelled of industrial cleaner and hidden things. If they come for you, he said, finally meeting her eyes directly, remember that the logs can be authenticated. Remember that truth leaves metadata. She wanted to ask who he was. She wanted to ask why he cared. She wanted to ask if the note in her hand was a lifeline or another chain. The doors began to close, and he stopped them with his shoulder, leaning in close enough that she could smell his soap, clean and unadorned. Meet me tomorrow. Same time. Bring the envelope. Then he was gone, and the elevator carried her down into the dark, carrying a fragile promise that felt like the first honest thing she had touched in years. The scapegoat campaign began at dawn, spreading through the hotel's nervous system like a toxin administered with surgical care. First came the badge audits, security personnel descending on the staff entrance with scanners and stern expressions, checking credentials that had been valid yesterday. Then the locker searches, conducted for your protection, finding nothing in Freya's but leaving her belongings scattered like evidence of a crime. Rumors appeared on the staff bulletin board, printed anonymously, suggesting Freya had been seen near the VIP floor multiple times that morning. Gareth watched it unfold from his post, noting how the narrative tightened around Freya like a noose, each administrative correction pulling the knot tighter. The concierge log had been updated to show a master key checkout in her name, though the signature did not match her handwriting. He photographed the discrepancies with his phone, the device registered to a name that was not Holloway, uploading to a cloud server with encryption he had installed himself. Magnus moved through the lobby like a physician observing a successful surgery, his charm turned up to compensate for the staff's visible distress. These protocols protect all of us, he told a gathered group of bellmen, his hand on Gareth's shoulder with the familiarity of ownership. Gareth smiled his polite, calculating smile, feeling the weight of the shoulder touch, cataloging it as evidence of contact, of pressure, of intent. The machinery of blame was fully operational now, and Freya's name was being etched into the hotel's permanent record with each passing hour. He wondered if she had slept, if she had spent the money, if she understood that the war had begun in earnest and mercy was a currency the hotel did not trade. In the linen room, he found a fresh sheet set and left a message in the fold, a time and a place written in the code they had developed in whispered conversations. The scapegoat machine required a body. He was determined that it would not be hers, even if he had to dismantle the machine piece by piece from the inside. The envelope appeared in Lost and Found at 11:20 a.m., delivered by a courier who did not exist in any employment database. It was sealed with wax bearing no insignia, addressed to hotel management, and logged with a case number that matched the missing passport report. Gareth was retrieving a guest's misplaced umbrella when he saw it, the number 7 Alpha 4412 written in precise, familiar handwriting. The date stamp on the envelope read 3 days prior to the passport's reported loss, a temporal impossibility that made his pulse quicken with recognition. He noted the chain of custody signature, a name he had planted himself in the system weeks ago, a ghost employee with perfect credentials. Freya found him in the service corridor, her face pale, her hands shaking with the news that her final warning had arrived. "They're moving my shift to overnight," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ice machine. "They're isolating me before they strike." He showed her the envelope, watching her eyes widen at the case number, at the date, at the implications of evidence that predated the crime. "This proves the loss was staged," he said, his legal phrasing slipping through before he could catch it, the terminology of courts and liability, not bellmen and tips. She looked at him then, really looked, seeing for the first time the sharpness beneath the exhaustion, the intelligence behind the polite deference. "Who are you?" she asked, but the question hung in the air unanswered, because the elevator dinged and footsteps approached, and the moment for truth was stolen by necessity. He pressed the envelope into her hands, his fingers lingering, transmitting courage through touch because words were too dangerous now. "Keep this safe. Don't open it yet. When the time comes, the chain of custody will matter more than the contents." She nodded, clutching the paper to her chest like a shield, wondering if the man beside her was her salvation or simply a more sophisticated trap. The humiliation was scheduled for 4:00 p.m., when the lobby traffic peaked with check-ins and a traveling press group was gathered for a hospitality conference. Freya was summoned to the front desk via the public address system, her name crackling through the marble space with intentional volume. She emerged from the service corridor to find Magnus Carradine standing behind the reception counter, his smile broadcast to the assembled guests like a theater performance. "Ms. Larkins," he said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a funeral director, "we must address the administrative irregularities that have compromised our security." The press group turned as one, cameras emerging with the reflex of predators scenting blood, capturing her uniform, her name tag, her frozen expression. "Effective immediately, you are demoted to probationary status, stripped of master key privileges, and reassigned to sanitation duties in the basement." The lobby fell silent except for the click of camera shutters, the sound of her dignity being archived for future use. Magnus produced a form, waving it like a flag of victory, claiming it documented her pattern of access violations and failure to report discrepancies. She saw Gareth across the lobby, standing at his bellman's post, his face a mask of professional neutrality that betrayed nothing of their midnight meetings. His eyes, however, met hers with a message clear as text: endure, survive, remember the envelope, remember the metadata, remember who you are beneath their narrative. A guest laughed, a small sound that cut deeper than Magnus' pronouncements, reducing her to entertainment for the wealthy and their documentarians. She signed the demotion form with a hand that did not shake, refusing to give them the satisfaction of visible breakdown, refusing to become the weeping servant of their morality play. As she turned to walk back to the service corridor, she heard Magnus addressing the press, framing her as a cautionary tale of internal accountability. The elevator doors closed on her humiliation, but she clutched the sealed envelope in her pocket, knowing that public degradation was not the end of the story. What she could not see, as the metal box descended, was Gareth's fingers moving across his phone, activating protocols that had waited months for this exact moment. Magnus found her in the basement locker room at 6:00 p.m., his shoes clicking on the concrete floor with the confidence of a man who owned the space beneath the earth. "Ms. Larkins," he said, his voice echoing off the metal lockers, "I believe we may have been hasty. The hotel values loyalty, and loyalty can be rehabilitated." He produced a new document, crisp and legal, offering reinstatement to her previous position with full back pay and a promotion to floor supervisor. The condition was simple: a signed statement detailing Gareth Holloway's suspicious behavior, his unauthorized access to guest floors, his potential involvement in the passport's disappearance. "He's using you," Magnus said, leaning close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and suffocating. "He's not who he claims to be. Sign this, and we protect you from his deception." Freya thought of the service elevator, of the note pressed into her palm, of the legal terminology that slipped from Gareth's tongue when he thought she wasn't listening. She thought of the envelope in her locker, dated before the crime, proving that the narrative Magnus constructed was built on manufactured sand. "I need time to consider," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest, playing for space, playing for Gareth's promised timeline. Magnus' smile tightened, the mask slipping to reveal the predator beneath the charm. 24 hours. After that, the offer expires, and the investigation into your sister's immigration status begins. He left her in the fluorescent hum of the basement, the threat hanging like a gas, invisible but choking, demonstrating the reach of his power beyond hotel walls. She opened her locker and retrieved the envelope, running her thumb over the wax seal, wondering if Gareth knew about her sister's papers, if he had planned for this cruelty. The choice was no longer simply truth versus convenience, it was Gareth's mysterious promise versus Magnus' explicit threat, faith versus documented terror. She sat on the bench until her shift ended, holding the envelope like a talisman, waiting for the meeting that would determine which version of reality would survive. Gareth found the routing slip wedged behind the concierge desk's bottom drawer, discovered during his 2:00 a.m. cleaning of the lobby area. It was a carbon copy, ancient technology in a digital age, which was precisely why it had survived the systematic deletion of electronic records. The slip documented the passport's movement from the minister's aide suite to the private lounge, carried by a name Freya had never heard: Victor Hale, Magnus' personal security contractor. The timestamp read 5:45 a.m., 30 minutes before Freya was alleged to have accessed the floor, carried by a man with diplomatic immunity and no hotel employee record. Gareth photographed the slip with his phone, then scanned it with a secondary device that uploaded to a server with legal-grade chain-of-custody protocols. He had spent 6 months embedding himself in this hotel, wearing the uniform of the invisible, learning the language of service that rendered him beneath notice. His true credentials were locked in a safe deposit box across the city, along with the case files that had brought him to the Carradine Grand's doorstep. He was not merely investigating the hotel, he was investigating the consortium Magnus chaired, a web of luxury properties that laundered more than linens. The passport was not lost, it was staged, part of a pattern of administrative errors that allowed VIPs to transport sensitive documents without customs scrutiny. Freya had been selected because she was vulnerable, because her sister's situation provided leverage, because her kindness made her unlikely to fight back with equal ferocity. He folded the routing slip into the envelope he carried, the one that would soon join Freya's in a dance of evidence that could not be digitally altered. The time for hiding was ending. The time for revelation was approaching. But first, he needed to ensure Freya would trust him when the mask finally came off. He left a message in the linen room, coded in the language of their midnight meetings tomorrow. The truth. Bring everything. The apology ceremony was scheduled for the morning shift, a grotesque performance of optics designed to demonstrate the hotel's commitment to accountability. Freya was ordered to stand at the front desk during peak hours, wearing a sign that read "Probationary staff under review," and apologized to any guest who complained. Gareth watched from his post as she stood there, her back straight, her eyes dry, refusing to bend beneath the weight of manufactured shame. A guest approached, a man in a suit similar to Magnus, and demanded an apology for a minibar charge from 3 days prior, though Freya had never touched his room. "I apologize for the hotel's failure to meet your standards," she said, her voice clear and strong, refusing to personalize the degradation. Magnus observed from the mezzanine, his smile fixed, expecting breakdown, expecting tears, expecting the video footage he could use to demonstrate corrective measures. Instead, Freya looked directly into the security camera and said, "I apologize that our logs were altered to protect wealthy criminals while blaming the poor." The lobby fell silent. The guests stepped back, confused by the shift in script. Magnus' hand tightened on the railing, his smile cracking like porcelain. Gareth moved then, crossing the lobby with the bellman's cart, positioning himself beside Freya in a stance that was protective, not servile. "Is there a problem?" he asked the guest, his voice carrying an authority that belied his uniform, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The guest retreated. The press group, still present, began recording. The power dynamic shifted, subtle but seismic, as the help stopped performing their assigned roles. Magnus descended the stairs, his composure fraying, demanding to know what Gareth thought he was doing, who he thought he was, how dare he interrupt the protocol. "I am preventing a wrongful termination," Gareth said, his legal phrasing fully exposed now, and documenting obstruction of justice. "Would you prefer I continue in public, or in private?" The witness panicked at noon, a junior concierge named Julian who had edited the timestamps under pressure and now feared exposure more than conscience. He approached Freya in the service corridor, his hands shaking, his voice a whisper that echoed off the concrete walls like a confession in a cathedral. "I didn't know they would destroy you," he said, tears cutting channels through his carefully maintained composure. "They said it was standard procedure. They said everyone does it." He produced a USB drive, encrypted, containing the original logs, the unedited versions, the metadata that proved when and how the alterations had occurred. "They're rewriting everything now," he said, glancing over his shoulder. Magnus brought in a team. "They're saying you stole the passport. They're saying you sold it." Freya took the drive, feeling the weight of digital evidence in her palm, understanding that truth had become a fugitive in the hotel it was supposed to protect. She found Gareth in the linen room, where they had shared their first fragile promise, and placed the drive in his hand along with Julian's trembling testimony. "Hell recant," Gareth said, not unkindly, reading the fear in Julian's eyes that matched the fear in every staff member who had ever crossed Magnus' path. "They're offering him a transfer to the Dubai property, full expat package, if he signs a statement saying I coerced him into fabricating evidence." The rich were rewriting the narrative in real time, purchasing silence with promotions, trading justice for jet-set lifestyles that the poor could not refuse. Gareth inserted the USB into his secondary device, watching the upload progress, knowing that every second of delay allowed Magnus' machine to manufacture counter-evidence. "We need to move the timeline," he said, his calm cracking to reveal the urgency beneath. "The sealed envelope. We need to open it now, together, with witnesses." Freya nodded, understanding that the moment of truth had arrived not with triumph but with desperation, the way most revolutions begin. They moved through the service corridors, avoiding cameras, carrying the evidence that would either save them or bury them deeper in the hotel's foundations. They opened the sealed envelope in the security office at 2:00 a.m., witnessed by Julian and a night auditor who had her own grievances against Magnus' regime. Inside was not merely documentation, but a master key to the investigation Gareth had been conducting for 18 months, a case file that transcended the hotel's walls. The envelope contained authenticated logs from 3 consortium properties, each showing the same pattern: lost documents, blamed staff, administrative errors that benefited VIP travelers. There was correspondence from regulatory agencies, inquiries that had been buried, whistleblowers who had been paid off or deported or silenced more permanently. And there was Gareth's true identification, not as a bellman, but as a crisis consultant retained by an international accountability consortium to investigate luxury hospitality fraud. Freya read the credentials twice, the words blurring as her understanding of the past months rearranged itself like a kaleidoscope shifting pattern. "You used me," she said, her voice flat, the hurt cutting through the relief of vindication. You let me think you were one of us. You let me trust you while you were investigating us. Gareth's tired eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw the exhaustion was real, the cost of wearing a mask so long it threatened to become skin. I am one of you, he said, his voice rough with emotion he had suppressed for months. I was poor before I was a lawyer. I know what it costs to be invisible. The documents proved that the passport's loss was engineered to test a new smuggling route, that Freya was selected as scapegoat before the crime was even conceived. The night auditor wept. Julian crossed himself. And Freya held the evidence that could bring down an empire, feeling the weight of justice mixed with the bitterness of betrayal. You should have told me, she whispered, but she was already folding the documents, preparing for the final confrontation, knowing that survival required using every weapon available. The truth was out. The identity was revealed. But the war was not yet won, and the morning would bring Magnus' final, desperate attempt to destroy them all. The shock identity reveal came not with a speech, but with a summons, delivered by process servers who entered the lobby at 9:00 a.m. with legal authority that dwarfed Magnus' charm. Gareth stood at the front desk, still in his bellman's uniform, as the servers presented injunctions freezing the consortium's assets and subpoenas demanding Magnus' appearance before regulators. I am Gareth Holloway, he said, his voice carrying through the lobby with the authority of someone who had finally dropped a performance, retained counsel for the International Hospitality Accountability Project. He produced credentials that had been authenticated by 3 governments, legal certifications that explained his precise phrasing, his strategic questions, his controlled reactions. The planted details bloomed like flowers long buried, the legal terminology that had slipped through in crisis moments, the authenticated log metadata he had collected, the sealed envelope's chain of custody that matched his case files. Magnus descended the stairs, his face gray, understanding too late that the bellman he had touched with condescending familiarity was the architect of his destruction. You infiltrated my hotel, Magnus said, his voice a snarl, but Gareth corrected him with the precision of a man who had waited months for this exact correction. I investigated your criminal enterprise, he said, documenting 18 months of administrative error, scapegoating, witness tampering, and document trafficking for elite clients. Freya stepped forward, holding the routing slip, the USB drive, the sealed envelope, her evidence combining with his to form a narrative that could not be unwritten. The press group recorded everything, streaming live, ensuring that Magnus' power to rewrite reality in private died in the glare of public exposure. You used her, Gareth said, his voice rising with controlled fury, because she was poor, because she was vulnerable, because you thought the help would never fight back. The legal mechanism was unstoppable now: criminal referrals to immigration fraud units, sanctions from travel consortium regulators, a board meeting scheduled to remove Magnus by noon. The identity reveal was not merely personal, it was structural, demonstrating that the invisible had been watching, documenting, preparing for the moment when truth could no longer be buried. The public power reversal unfolded with the inevitability of gravity, each piece of evidence triggering mechanisms that Magnus' wealth could not purchase or intimidate into silence. Regulatory agencies that had been stonewalled for years responded to the authenticated documentation with the speed of bureaucracies sending high-profile culpability. The consortium's board convened via emergency video link, voting unanimously to suspend Magnus pending criminal investigation, his name stripped from the properties he had treated as personal fiefdoms. Freya testified before a hastily assembled press conference, her voice steady, her sister's tuition now secured by victim compensation funds rather than hush-money bribes. She spoke of service elevators and linen rooms, of the moral test between truth and convenience, of how poverty was weaponized to enforce silence among those who cleaned the wealthy's messes. Gareth stood beside her, not as her savior, but as her witness, his legal expertise now openly deployed to ensure that the scapegoat machine could never restart with new victims. The hotel staff emerged from service corridors to watch the broadcast, seeing for the first time that their invisibility had been a choice imposed by power, not a natural law. Magnus was escorted from the property by federal agents, his smile finally extinguished, his power revealed as the illusion it had always been, maintained only by the consent of the unseen. The justice was public, legal, and irrevocable, but it left scars. Freya flinched at sudden loud noises, Gareth woke at 3:30 a.m. expecting to return to hidden identity, their trust rebuilt slowly in daylight. They met in the service elevator one final time, not for secrets, but for honesty, acknowledging that love born in shadows required adaptation to survive in the sun. The hotel remained, but its hierarchy was shaken, its protocols rewritten, its staff no longer quite so invisible to the guests who passed through marble lobbies in expensive shoes. And somewhere in the files Gareth had compiled, the pattern continued: other hotels, other Freyas, other Magnus Carradines waiting to be exposed by those willing to wear the uniform of the ignored. Some stories end with weddings, but this one ends with witness statements and scar tissue that aches when it rains. Freya and Gareth did not ride into the sunset, they rode the service elevator to the basement, where they filed paperwork ensuring that the next housekeeper targeted by administrative error would have legal recourse before the humiliation became public. The love between them was not healed by justice, it was transformed by it, made complicated by the revelation that trust can be both weapon and wound. They learned to be honest in a language they had both forgotten, speaking plainly about fear and class and the weight of masks worn too long. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in the linen rooms or the service corridors, leave a comment sharing what truth you've been asked to sacrifice for convenience. Like this video not for the algorithm, but for the invisible people in your own life who deserve to be seen. Share it with someone who needs to remember that power is temporary, but dignity is earned through refusal to perform degradation. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because the next investigation is already underway, and the help are watching more closely than the wealthy imagine. The story continues in the shadows, until the shadows are no longer necessary.